Good morning, guys. This is View from the Pew. It is Thursday, April 22nd. Just making sure that's correct. 2021. And we're talking about the commands of Christ in the Gospel of Mark. And the more I study these commands of Christ, the more I realize something. And I don't know if you who have been long-term Christians are going to like this. I don't know if I like it. And I feel a little ashamed as a pastor to say this, but especially after my Bible study last night with our adults and reading through some of what Luke said, I'm not sure that knowing the commands is simply elementary Christianity, first year Christianity. And a lot of us don't know the commands like we should, nor do we do them like we should. And I'm not making any judgments on you. You may be the exception to the rule, but it's been my experience that if we don't know it, we generally don't do it. And we need to know it, so we will do it. So that's why we're looking at this. So we're in Mark. We're in what is called in Matthew the Olivet Discourse, which is Jesus' last week of his life, comes out of the temple. The disciples make some comments about, isn't this a beautiful temple? And Jesus says, it's going to be totally torn down, guys. And they say, Lord, what's going on with all that? And he sits down with them and begins to talk to them about future events. Now, the command that he gives them, I believe it's also for us because they did not experience this. We have not yet experienced this. And I know this because of a verse we're going to look at today. And that is the command to flee. The command to flee. Now, if there's a choice between fight and flight, and fight means taking another person's life, I don't think a Christian can do that, and here's why. Because that other person has a soul. And I know I'm going to get in some trouble for this, but, you know, if your conscience leads you otherwise, I understand. Understanding defending family and all that. But Jesus says, if the opportunity comes, don't fight, flee. And there's a very specific event he's talking about in which that fleeing needs to take place. And that event is the Abomination of Desolation. The Abomination of Desolation is talked about by the prophet Daniel. And it evidently is an event that I believe is yet to take place. It is a complete, total, demonic desecration of the Holy of Holies in the temple of God. It's either Satan setting himself up or setting up an idol of himself or both in the temple of God. And I know there's been foreshadowings of this from earlier in Jewish history, and you could even point to the Romans when they destroyed the temple, but I want you to listen to the passage and you'll see why I believe at least this hadn't yet taken place. Verse 14, Jesus says, so when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Flee to the mountains. Let him who is on the housetop not go down into the house, nor enter to take anything out of his house. And let him who is in the field not go back to get his clothes. So it's the idea of not just planning a trip, it's the idea of get out of there and get out of there now. But woe to those who are pregnant and those who are nursing babies in those days. It'll probably be harder on them as they travel. And pray that your flight may not be in the winter. For in those days there will be, and here's the key verse to me that says, this has not yet happened yet. For in those days there will be tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the creation, which God created until this time, nor ever shall be. Now there have been some bad tribulation moments. I'm sure the Roman occupation and the destruction of the temple was bad, but I think it could have been worse. And I think it will be worse in latter days. There's certainly been worse wars. There's been worse tribulation on Christians that has happened outside of Israel and has happened outside of the Middle East since then. But Jesus is pointing to a pinnacle event where everything on this side of it looks like nothing, and everything on the other side of it looks like nothing. It'll be a tribulation, like Jesus says, like none you've ever experienced, nor will ever be experienced again. This is the pinnacle tribulation event. That's why we call it the Great Tribulation. And unless the Lord has shortened those days, no flesh would be saved. So this is a universal genocide that is occurring, shaped around the abomination of desolation. But for the elect's sake, whom he chose, he shortened the days. And it may be the elect has included Gentiles and Jews, but the Bible also uses the term elect to specifically speak to Jews. And within this context, I think we're looking at that. And I think we're looking at, as I look at eschatology, and this is my belief about it, we're all going to probably be wrong to some degree when it all pans out. But I believe there will be a 7-year tribulation period with a 3.5-year great tribulation period, which will be the worst persecution on people that's ever been. And the brunt of that attack will be upon the Jewish people, and they will suffer great tribulation. And if it were not for the total destruction of all of them, God would allow it to continue. So 3.5 years of hell on earth. And what does Jesus say to do? He says, flee, flee. And there's a need in our lives at times to flee. In this situation, understand that God is working a plan, and you need to get out of there and not try to fight. You know, take any nation, take the United States of America for one. There may well come a time when it's very clear that unless God intervenes, nothing's going to change. And if we fight against what God is trying to do by judging our nation because of our sin, all we're going to do is lose our lives and maybe take some with us who have yet to trust Christ. So the right thing to do, if you can, is flee. Chinese church knows that. Churches, Middle East underground churches know that. They understand to survive another day is not a bad thing, so flee. And let me go ahead real quickly and mention a couple other things about fleeing as well. Christian, you ought to be fleeing some things in your life, even if there isn't any physical persecution. Flee sexual immorality. Flee idolatry. It's good at times to flee. It's good to know when it's above your pay grade, out of your element, and you need to get out of that situation and get out of it right now. Get out of it fast. So the command Jesus gives in the midst of this great tribulation to his people for their sake, especially in Judea, because that's where this is going down, is to flee. And we would do well to learn from Jesus' words. So I pray God will speak to us today, help us to be faithful to the commands of Christ. Let it be the foundation of our discipleship, and let us build upon it. So God bless you, and you have a great Thursday.